will run some preliminary slides about SCORE, and then we'll start the presentation. I would like to ask you to put your questions in the chat. And at the end of the webinar, I'll read them to Chris. He can't see the chat from the device that he's using. And so at that point, he'll respond to them. If we run out of time before we answer all the questions from the chat, I will forward them to Chris and he'll respond via email after the webinar. The webinar is being recorded. It will be available on the SCORE Cleveland website. It will also be available on the SCORE Cleveland YouTube channel. Both of those videos will be up probably early next week. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and start the webinar. Let's go. Here we go. I gotta minimize that. Hey, hang on, stop.
Dan, while you're working, do you want me to introduce myself?
Yeah, introduce yourself, please.
Okay. My name is Chris Corpus. I'm a local business attorney here in the Cleveland market. Went to Ashland University, graduated with a business management degree, worked at Kmart for 4 years as a manager and as a recruiter. I then went to law school at Case Western Reserve University, graduated back in 2000, and then worked at a small law firm for a few years, worked at a medium-sized law firm with 30 attorneys for quite a few years. And then back in 2016, I left the firm and started my own firm. So entrepreneur, just like you folks. Been doing this, heavens, is going on 7 years now. And I just help clients with business and corporate matters, commercial real estate matters, and trademarks. So I help clients, set up businesses, buy businesses, sell businesses, draft contracts, review contracts, buy and sell commercial real property, and the leasing of commercial real property. And I also help clients with trademarks. A lot of times, clients are not interested in getting a trademark, but it's helpful to review the names of products or companies to ensure they're not infringing on someone else's trademark. And so I also apologize. I'm out of the office right now, and I had poor internet reception. So I am speaking from my car. So.
Okay, I should mention that this is the first of 5 webinars on legal series. The others are human resources, intellectual property, business contracts, and patents. These will be scheduled in the future, and we will announce them through the SCORE newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter at the SCORE website. To talk a little bit right now about SCORE, I'm going to share my screen and bring this up. Can you see my slides? Chris, can you see my slides?
I do not. You're front center.
Hang on a second. Let me just go back here. Here we go, share. All right, here we go. Now let's try this. All right, now you should be able to see the slides.
Yes. Yep.
All right. Okay, this is SCORE, basically a little kind of explanation of who we are and what we do. SCORE is a chapter in Cleveland, is one of almost 250 chapters nationwide. There are about 90 people in Cleveland who are SCORE mentors or subject matter experts, and there are over 12,000 people nationwide who are mentors and subject matter experts in SCORE. SCORE has the largest network of free volunteer small business mentors in the nation. And no matter what stage your business is at, SCORE has a mentor for you. And you can request a mentor at the SCORE Cleveland website just by clicking on Request a Mentor. And there's a little form you fill out, tell them about your business, and then a mentor with some background in your area of business will be assigned to you. SCORE's mission is to foster vibrant small business communities through mentoring and education. We don't consult with businesses, nor do we go hands-on with them. I'll talk more about our ethical rules in a minute. We do aim to give every person the support they need to thrive as a small business owner. Small business drives our national economy, as you know, through business formation, job creation, and wealth building. Small businesses are critical to vibrant communities in our society, and SCORE volunteers give freely of their time, energy, and knowledge. No one at SCORE is paid to do this work. We have a number of different ways that we reach out to different entrepreneurial communities, Black entrepreneurs, veteran entrepreneurs, Hispanic entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs, and many others. SCORE empowers all entrepreneurs to succeed. In SCORE in 2022, we were named nationwide the 2022 Chapter of the Year because of our impact on the community. 501 new businesses were started, 808 jobs were created, and total mentoring sessions were almost 7,600. We serve all of Northeast Ohio, Cuyahoga, Lake, Lorraine, Geauga, Ashtabula, Huron, and Erie counties. And we have a direct effect and serve as a catalyst for businesses and job creation. Small businesses that need mentoring and educational support to be successful come to SCORE, and we are an effective source of small business mentoring in the U.S. Because our work is supported by the U.S. Small Business Administration and a few generous sponsors, we give thanks to our network of 10,000 volunteers, and we deliver all of our services at no charge. I want to mention an event that is coming up for those of you who are entrepreneurs and have businesses, and that is that SCORE Cleveland has a brand new client networking event. It's taking place in September, and it is a networking event which will allow you to build relationships, and the first 200 people to sign up can secure a place. The event is absolutely free. We also will be serving hors d'oeuvres and have a cash bar. To register and connect and get information on the date and location, go to the SCORE website. This is the SCORE website. When you see this, you'll know you're in the right place.
Dan, I apologize to interrupt. There's just been some comments that have come across that it sounds like you may be in the wrong mode. I'm not sure if people are seeing the slides.
They're not seeing the slides. All right. I am sharing the screen. Do you not see the slides at all?
I see on my device, I see, it looks like what your screen is in the background, and you're a small square up in the top corner of my screen.
Okay, now do you see the slide in the main screen? Because it says
I do.
Okay. Let me look in the chat for a minute. Because there's all kinds of notes here. The presenter is showing not the full screen. A subtitle pop-up is blocking the screen. Interesting. I wonder why that is. Seeing the presenter view. All right, let's try this again.
Oh, and someone else just responded that they see the slides. So
okay,
maybe someone has it's a setting on someone's individual computer.
Okay. All right. Again, apologize if technical difficulties. The slides and the session will be available on the SCORE website. All right. So let me close out the sharing here and bring up the presenter's slides. Hang on a second while I do that. Let me close this. And let me go to your slides here. Let me minimize this down to there. Let me bring this back up and to share my screen, share, and let me bring that. Okay, can you see the SCORE Small Business Legalese?
This is Chris. Yes, I can.
Okay, let me just get this out of the way here, and I'm going to put this in presentation mode and close that. All right, you should be able to see full screen SCORE Small Business Legalese. Chris, do you see that?
That looks perfect.
All right, yeah, just say next slide when you're ready
Yep.
to move on. I'm going to mute myself as we go along here.
Yep. So when you're ready, you can go to the next slide.
Okay, I just close this. Whoops. Don't do that. Okay, there we go.
Okay, so first off, I want to congratulate everyone for becoming a part of SCORE. It's a great organization. I have a number of clients that have used SCORE in different different reasons, and my clients have always been happy with the mentorship and the advice and views of the SCORE coaches. So there's a lot of information out on the internet. In my opinion, it can be overwhelming. So I do applaud you for taking the time out to get some if you're going to say some expertise from the SCORE coaches that have seen a lot, gone through a lot, and hopefully can give some good information to the companies and that they assist. So here's what we're going to talk about today. So this presentation, I kind of liken it to a mile wide and an inch deep. We talk about it quite a few different topics. But we don't get into real deep depth on them, just for the fact that people in the audience are varying in their experience in business. It could be you're just looking to start up a business and haven't even started yet, or you've been in business for a number of years and you're looking to get a little bit of information. So we're going to cover quite a few topics. So we're going to talk about business entity selection, business partners, franchising or independent businesses, site selection, general contract issues, and intellectual property issues. Okay, next slide. So just the different types of business entities that you can select. One is a sole proprietorship and another is a partnership or a general partnership. And for both a sole proprietorship and a general partnership, those businesses get created even if you didn't mean to create one. That's just going to be by a matter of law. You've created a sole proprietorship or a partnership. And so when does this entity get created as a matter of law? It's basically when you start selling something and you're getting paid for it. It could be, cookies that you bake out of your house. It could be a stand that you have at the local fair. As soon as you sell something and then you ultimately, get paid for it, then ultimately that results in a sole proprietorship or a partnership being created. And so what's the difference between a sole proprietorship and a partnership? To a degree, a little bit self-explanatory. Sole proprietorship is there's only one business owner. You can have employees as a sole proprietor, but you are the sole owner. And then obviously with a partnership, there is more than one owner. And it could be 2 owners, it could be 10 owners. But as soon as you start operating a business and getting paid for it, then you've created either a sole proprietorship or a partnership. In the 23 years I've been doing this, I've never once purposely created a sole proprietorship or a general partnership. And the reason for that is you are personally liable for everything that you do in a sole proprietorship and a general partnership. And in a general partnership, you're personally liable for everything your partner does. And as soon as people hear that, they're like, I'm out. No, thanks. I'm not going to create a general partnership on purpose. And so then a limited partnership, those were relatively popular before limited liability came along. And so I'm really not even going to, take time in our limited time to talk about a limited partnership because quite frankly, the structure of a limited partnership you can create with a limited liability company if you so choose. And again, in 23 years, I've never created a limited partnership for someone. And so what are the two, then it leaves the other two, which are which people are going to be familiar with, is a limited liability company and a corporation. For every 10 entities I create for clients, it's going to be 9 limited liability companies and 1 corporation. It could even be out of 20. It would be 19 limited liability companies and 1 corporation. And if it's a corporation, there's usually some sort of reason for it. Generally, someone is not going to select a corporation as an entity just because. There's usually some reason or purpose why they're selecting that corporation entity. Because a corporation that you create is no different than General Motors or Ford or any of these other large companies. You have to have a separate board of directors, you have shareholders making decisions, and you have officers making decisions. And it's, you have some extra hierarchies of management decision making that you just maybe don't need. And that's why a limited liability company is such a great entity selection, because you could create a limit. When you create a limited liability company, you can make it look and feel like a corporation. You can make it look and feel like a general partnership. It's a very, very flexible entity. So it's a good choice. And the nice thing about a limited liability company or corporation is you do not have personal liability as you do for a sole proprietorship and a general partnership. So for both a limited liability company and a corporation, you are not personally liable for the debts of the entity. No different than if you were a shareholder in Toys R Us. Toys R Us goes bankrupt. The creditors don't come after the shareholders and say, hey, you guys owe us some more money. Please, shareholders cough up some extra money. No different than with your entity. Now, with that being said, if you go to a bank to borrow money for your company, what's the bank going to do? They're going to say, we need a personal guarantee from the owners. So ultimately, but that's a contract. So you choose to give a personal guarantee to your creditors. You don't have to, then you probably don't get the loan, but you don't have to give that personal guarantee. So this limited liability of a limited liability company and a corporation comes into play with like a tort. You have you're making your cookies and someone gets sick. The person who got sick files a lawsuit against you. They don't name you personally, they just name your corporate entity. And so, with a limited liability company, you could be run by the members, which is similar to a shareholder. The members ultimately can elect a manager, which is similar to a president. So it's a very, very flexible entity for you to be able to run it the way you would like to structure your business. So, that'd be some questions. How do you want to structure your business? And we could probably fit that into a limited liability company. Now, once you set up your limited liability company or corporation, then you have some tax questions to answer. So a corporation, by default, you're taxed as a C corporation, which means your corporate entity itself pays tax. That's that lower corporate tax rate that you hear about. And with a corporation that's a C corporation, you have double taxation because you pay tax when you earn the money. Then if you make a profit distribution, you pay tax again when you distribute the profit out to the shareholders. But there are reasons that you would have a C corporation. Many small businesses don't need that. And then you can make the S election. So your sub S tax election, that now means your corporate entity itself does not pay tax, and all the income flows through your personal tax return of the owners. So you don't have that double taxation with an S corporation. And then with a limited liability company, the IRS, when limited liability companies were created in the 1990s, did not create a separate tax structure for limited liability companies because obviously it's confusing enough. So limited liability companies are taxed based on predetermined boxes. And so if you're a sole proprietor, if you're a sole member limited liability company, then by default, you're taxed like you're a sole proprietorship for tax purposes. If you have more than one owner, then by default, the IRS taxes you as a general partnership for tax purposes. Now, you're still a limited liability company with limited liability protection for your owners, but for tax purposes, they'll treat you as a sole proprietorship or a general partnership. And then to confuse things even more, you as a limited liability company, you could also make the sub S tax election. Now you're taxed like a corporation, but you are a limited liability company. That is about as much as I get into that with clients. I am not a tax attorney. I'm not an accountant. So I recommend to clients review this with their accountant to make sure they're moving in the right direction regarding taxes. And then the federal government so Ohio also has a benefit corporation. With a limited liability company, you can have a series limited liability company. So there's some other options that you have that we won't get into because they're pretty unique issues. And so then I just see someone put in the chat, what about an EIN? That's your social security number for your company. And so when you do create your limited liability company or corporation, one of the owners, quote unquote, the responsible party, would then ultimately file to get a tax identification number from the IRS. That's a free filing because then that's what you use to ultimately get you to pay your taxes to the government. And then probably most importantly, the federal government just recently passed a law called the Corporate Transparency Act. And in general, it's a little bit of a complicated law, but to boil it down, any limited liability company and any corporation that was created will need to file and register with basically the federal government, FinCEN, Financial Crimes Network, and because based on money laundering. And what information does have to be filed? It's relatively intrusive. It's the name of every owner of the business that has a 25% more ownership interest in the business. Then that the person who is a 25% or more owner has to give their full name, their birth date, their mailing address, and their driver's license number or their passport number, and also a photograph of your driver's license and passport. And if you have a company that's created today, then you have until December 31st, 2024 to file that information. If you create a new company on January 1st, 2024 or later, then that information has to be filed with the government within 30 days of creation. And then there's some exemptions, but in general, if you have a business that's an active going concern, that you will have to file this information. And but so there's a bunch of exemptions, but ultimately, for the most part, all my small business clients are going to be having to file this. Okay, next slide, please. All right, business partners. I always ask clients, is this person partner worthy? Why are you making this person a partner in your business? Because once they're a partner, very difficult to remove them. And also, if they're a minority owner, they have you as the majority owner are going to have fiduciary duties to your minority owner. So you really do have to, now your decisions are going to be put under a microscope to make sure you're not making decisions that benefit you to the detriment of a minority owner. Just because someone's a good employee doesn't mean they're a business partner. Just because someone's loyal doesn't mean they're a business partner. So you really have to think, is this person truly a partner? And generally, when I ask the question, okay, you want to expand, something happens, machine breaks, and you need $10,000 to come from the owners. I hope the plan is to pay you back, but right now you don't have the cash for that. So if you have a 20% owner, that's an employee, that means they have to come up with $2,000 to put into the business. And is that employee / owner willing to put their money into your company? Generally, I believe the feeling is probably no. What does this employee that wants to be an owner want? They want the profit distributions. So I really caution my clients to really think, do they really want a business partner? Because it's just, business partnerships are no different than marriage. And, but what is it? 50% of marriages fail. So it's really, you really have to go in lightly when you decide if you want to have this business partner or not. And some of the things to think about is, are there overlapping skills, or do you each have different skills that, kind of are complementary to each other? So, I'm not anti-partner. But ultimately, I really want the business owner to think, is this person really partner worthy? Because once you come to me and say, hey, I would like to make this person a business partner, then we have this discussion like, oh boy, maybe I really don't want them as a business partner. Pretty hard to unring that bell. So really think carefully before you make someone a business partner. An owner in your company. A lot of times you can just have alternative compensation, employment compensation for a good employee. And if you make a profit distribution to yourself, you could agree to pay them 5% of a profit distribution you make. You're still the sole owner. You just agree to, if anything happens, great. I'm willing to share it with you. You've been a good employee. So I'm all for sharing profit distributions with employees, but not necessarily making them a true owner in your company. And I had a client, and I talked about this financial considerations, equity versus a loan. He's like, yep, I got a business partner. I'm like, oh, that's kind of good. What happened? What's going on? He's like, oh yeah, they're going to give me money. I'm like, do you have to pay it back? He's like, yep. I'm like, really? He's like, oh yeah, you have to pay him back. I'm like, well, that's a loan. If like on Shark Tank, when you hear someone say, I'll give you, $100,000 for 20% of your company, if that company closes, then that investor doesn't get their $100,000 back. That's an equity interest in your company. But if that company closes, you still owe that $100,000. Well, that's just a loan. So you do want to understand where your funding sources are coming from and what exactly terms are they looking for. And if you're getting money from friends and family, even more does that need to be in writing. So everyone understands what is given, what the obligations are, and what are the expectations. Because if someone gives you $10,000, the next thing you know, you buy a new electric bicycle for $2,500, and you're like, what? Why do you do with my money? You're like, oh yeah. Or you go on vacation and you're like, oh yeah, I need a break, need to recharge. And you're like, I didn't give you money to go on a vacation. So, and then if you start, and it's been a while and you're starting to buy yourself nice cars and you're not paying this person back, the relative is like, what's going on? You're like, I didn't know you wanted the money back. I thought it was a gift. So and it's not just a business relationship that can go sour. It's also family or friends. So you really, really, really need to be careful, especially if you're a parent or you're borrowing money from a parent or a parent's giving you money to help you start your business. I think it needs to be a family decision. Everyone needs to be involved. Because if you get a large chunk of money and the business fails, then potentially you're getting a disproportionate amount of inheritance from other family members. So you really have to be careful when you're borrowing money from friends or family, or friends and family are going to become owners in your company. So, okay, next slide. Franchising or independent businesses. I have a number of clients that are franchises. The majority of my clients are independent businesses. I don't think there's a right answer. I think franchises do hold a place in the business landscape. Ultimately, when you get into a franchise concept, you just want to make sure that it's a good franchise. It's been around, it's established, it has a very good support system. Other franchisees are happy. There's a lot of franchisees. There's not much franchisee turnover. But then you also are kind of not very creative because the franchisor says, here's the business model, here's the operations manual, don't deviate from it. And we're not going to let you deviate from it. So you have to be willing to take another company's business practices and make them your own without trying to tweak it, because the franchisor is probably not going to let you. So that's where, but if you don't have much business experience, then franchises are great, right? You get, you don't have the trial and error of trying to get the right POS software, the operations manual, it's all given to you in a 3-ring binder. And you just need to kind of read through, start it up, and have at it. And your coach, the franchisor is going to have coaches for you, going to have staff to make sure you're successful, because obviously they want you to be successful because they want you to generate income, because they're going to get some percentage of it from every sale that you make. But ultimately, if you're not satisfied with following what someone else says and you're always tweaking, then I don't think a franchise is going to be right for you, because you're not going to be happy. And if you're like, oh, I just want to get experience, and in 5 years, I'm going to sell the franchise, I'm going to do this on my own. Well, there's going to be a non-compete in that franchise agreement saying that you're not able to do the same business for probably about 2 years, or maybe longer, it could be 5 years, because you've learned all this information from the franchisor. So I have clients that are franchises. They're very happy. They're successful. But you just have to make sure that you're of that mindset that you're okay with following someone else's requirements and how to run the business. And then as an independent business owner, you are going to have U-turns. You're going to make decisions, and it's not going to be the right one. You're going to have the wrong software. You're like, oh, that didn't work. Oh, this website it doesn't have the functionality I need. Oh, something changed. Your marketing, trial and error. Am I on Facebook? Where are my customers at? Are they on, what used to be the Twitter? So you ultimately have to look and say, you have to make changes, and you just have to be expecting that. So, and if you are interested in a franchise opportunities, there's franchises that are franchise matchmakers. One of those is called FranNet. They put you through a small little personality and business understanding and experience kind of tests or questionnaires, and then then it ultimately generates a listing of potential franchise opportunities for you. So there's a lot of opportunities out there. Okay, next slide. And then site selection. So this is whether you want to run your business out of your home or you want to lease a location or buy a location. The zoning issues are the first question you have to ask. Am I able to run my business out of this location? Just because someone else ran a business that was similar out of that location doesn't mean you are going to be able to. It's one quick phone call to the building department or the zoning department and say, here's the address. Can I run this type of business out of here? I had one client who wanted to run like an electrician, business. And they're like, oh, yeah, you can run that business out of there. I'm like, but can he park 20 work vans there? They're like, nope, business park. Can't be on a main road like this. So, and if you're going to try to run a business out of your home, if in your home, you're not going to, if you're in a residential district, you're not going to have the open neon sign up in your home. And you're not going to really, if you end up having customers that come to your home for service, the city probably won't find out about it on their own, but a nosy neighbor that you made mad will, they're going to report you. And so generally you can run your business out of your home, but if you have customers coming to your home, then that's going to be a problem. You're not going to be able to run your business out of your home. I had a client had a detailing business, and he wasn't just detailing one car at a time. He had cars stacked up in his driveway. And they ultimately said, no, this is a residential neighborhood. You can't run this business from here. So zoning, big issue. Need to make sure and again, it gets addressed with one phone call. And like types of businesses, just because, a certain type of business has been previously operated out of that location, again, make that phone call to the zoning department. Hours of operation, you want to check to see if that particular location is going to allow you to run the business the way you want. Do you want to be open late? Do you have certain hours that you want to be open? So again, people in the building department, they don't want to have an enforcement issue. They don't want a problem. They're always happy to talk about these questions in advance. And that could make you decide whether you do or don't want to lease or purchase a particular building. Same thing about, what kind of floor plan do you want? Do you want to have a patio? What is this all going to look like? And then liquor license, that's a different animal. That's going to be granted by the state of Ohio. And every community only has a certain number of liquor licenses that can be issued. So, but again, you want to, if you ultimately are planning on serving alcohol on premises, you want to make sure that that's going to be permitted in that location. Okay, next slide. And then lease issues. So they're listed on this slide. They're going to be different in every lease, but all of these will be somewhere in your lease if you are going to lease a location, whether it's, a standalone building in a strip mall, in an office building, whatever it might be. So term and renewals, how long's your initial term? How many renewals do you have, if any? Landlords usually like longer initial terms. They like to be able to lock up that tenant and not have to keep looking for a new tenant. If you're a brand new business, generally you want a shorter term. You don't know if you're going to grow. You don't know if you're going to need to downsize. Look what happened with COVID and people working remotely. So, generally, I would like to have a 2 or 3 year initial lease, and then, 3 or 4 or 5, additional terms of 2 or 3 years. But generally, my experience has been that the length of the lease and the rent are inverse to each other. So that the shorter the lease, the greater the rent, more risk on the part of the landlord. The longer the lease, the lower the rent can be with negotiations, because the landlord can book that rent for 3, 5, 6, 7 years instead of 1. So, but though you just need to consider those. Monthly rent, percentage rent, and CAM. So every lease is going to have that. Every month you have to pay a certain amount of rent, a base rent. Then if you're like in a mall of some sort, like a Crocker Park, Great Northern, Beechwood, you maybe also be paying percentage rent. Usually that means the landlord is doing something to drive traffic to the location. So the landlord wants to be compensated for that. If you're in just some no-name strip mall, you should never be probably paying percentage rent. And then you're like, okay, so what are things that landlords do to drive traffic? Fireworks, 4th of July festivals, Santa Claus, those types of things where the landlord's taking actions to drive traffic to the location. And then CAM is your common area maintenance. That would be all of the areas outside of your specific premises that all tenants use in common: driveway, sidewalks, elevators, common restrooms that all tenants use. So the landlord is responsible to maintain those. And then there are some leases where, the landlord says, okay, if you have 10% of the total leasable square footage that you rent, then you're going to pay 10% of my CAM costs. If there is no CAM that is being charged in the lease, then the landlord has just built that into your monthly rent. So you are paying CAM, but ultimately it's just built into your monthly rent. You don't have to worry about getting a separate bill at the end of the year or paying a separate amount every month towards this CAM charge. Then a triple net lease. So that means that you're, as the tenant, you're responsible for paying your proportionate share, like I said before, like your 10% share of the landlord's property taxes, of the landlord's insurance premium cost, and it could even be the landlord's capital repairs. So if you're going to be paying a triple net lease, this better be a Class A space in a very nice location, very sought after location, because otherwise it's not going to be probably worth you having additional expenses every month, paying the landlord's expenses. But if you're in a Class A location, then you have to be prepared that there may be a triple net request, or it could be a double or a single net, depending on how many expenses the landlord is requesting you to reimburse the landlord. And then landlord responsibilities and tenant responsibilities, these go hand in hand. So if something breaks, one of you's got to fix it. Typically, everything on the inside of the premises is going to be the tenant's responsibility. Everything on the outside of the premises is going to be the landlord's responsibility. And there's going to be 2 paragraphs in the agreement. One's going to be tenant, one's going to be landlord. You just have to review that to make sure who's responsible to repair, maintain, and the biggest R is replace. Replace is generally a capital expenditure. So if someone has to replace the heating or cooling system, that's going to be capital, and who's going to be responsible for that. And then again, personal guarantee, we talked about this with a loan from a bank. Many landlords are going to request, especially a new business, that the owner give a personal guarantee. And so you need to review the terms of that guarantee. Is it for the entire duration of the lease? Is it only for the first term and no renewal terms? Is it only for the amount of the landlord's build out that the landlord contributed to the improvement of the space? So you want to kind of review those issues. And signage, what kind of signage are you looking to put up? Where are you looking to put it up? What size, what color, what font? So you want to have, in my opinion, you have these discussions with the landlord before you sign your lease. And then restrictions and covenants. If you have a Dunkin' Donuts or a Starbucks on your plaza, then they probably have a restriction that no other business can sell coffee or something to that effect. So you want to ask the landlord, are there any restrictions or covenants of what you can or cannot sell out of your space based on agreements with other tenants? And then you could also ask the landlord to put in a restriction also, saying that you agree that, as long as I'm in good standing, that you're not going to lease a premises to a business that is competitive to mine. So pretty important to also review that in your lease to see if that's something that you would need and can potentially negotiate. Okay, next slide. And then general contract issues. So know what you're signing. So if you don't understand a provision in an agreement, that means you need to, contact an attorney and say, hey, please review this. What am I signing? Because if you don't understand it, that's going to be a problem. Because if that situation occurs, you weren't even able to analyze the risk because you didn't understand some provision and how it was worded or what it actually meant. Contracts are not doorstops. They're not paperweights. Every paragraph in that agreement is going to mean something, and it has a purpose. It could even be, a form selection clause at the end of the agreement that says any dispute between the parties is going to be handled in, the state of New York. And now it's inconvenient to you to have to hire a lawyer in New York and then travel there to file your lawsuit. So all these provisions do mean something, and you want to, review them and make sure you understand why this provision is in here. Generally, contracts are assorting risk between the parties so that, if an issue happens, who's responsible for it? So it's the allocation of risk is usually what's occurring in these contracts. And then statement of work and deliverables, that's probably the most important provisions in your agreement. What are you doing? Who's doing it? How are you doing it? When are you doing it? When are you getting paid? How are you getting paid? What are the terms of payment? Those are things that really need to be reviewed carefully so that you have a good understanding of exactly what you're doing, how you're doing it, when you're doing it, what are you buying? Is a warranty being given? Is a guarantee being given? All these different things need to be reviewed and analyzed. as part of your statement of work, or what you're getting or what you're not getting. Like if you're going to build a website for someone, you don't want to, say, okay, I'm going to build your website, and then 3 weeks later you say, here you go, and then they're like, that's nothing what I wanted. Should you have a situation where you have a big project, there should be breakpoints or waypoints where you check in with the client reviews it, client says, yep, that's good, client makes a payment to you, so the whole thing is not a receivable, and you're getting paid as you go, the client's approving it as you go, and then you have a situation where you have a shorter U-turn. If the client is not happy with something, you need to make a change. Or if at the end the client's not happy, then ultimately you just, you've been approving this all along. You just change your mind, and that's going to result in an extra fee or cost. And again, compensation or payment terms, when are you supposed to get paid? How are you going to get paid? The biggest thing is, the smallest amount, if you're going to hold something back until you're finished, that should be maybe 10%. By no means should, the last payment to a client upon delivery be 50%. You want to make it so, yes, there's maybe a little bit held back, so the client feels comfortable that you're going to deliver, but it should be a pretty small percent by this time, 5 or 10%. And then these boilerplate provisions, if you look at enough contracts, at the end of the contract, you're going to see the same provisions over and over and over again, but they do mean something. And so you do have to understand what these boilerplate provisions mean. And so what's a boilerplate provision? Again, it could be like your form selection clause. Which state will the dispute be handled in? It could be, an entire agreement clause. All these negotiations that you've had leading up to now, we're not going to consider any of those negotiations. We're just going to consider what's in the contract itself. What's the final agreement between the parties? So when I talk to a client, I'll always ask them, what else have you talked about? Is everything in the agreement that you've talked about, or is there something missing? So there are provisions at the end of the contract. They're very similar and very, in quite a few different agreements, but you want to understand what those mean and how they impact, if there is a dispute in the future. Okay, next slide. All right, then intellectual property issues. We'll briefly touch on non-disclosure issues, patents, copyrights, trademarks, and we probably won't have time for licensing. So, okay, next slide. All right, so non-disclosure issues. So one itself is just a non-disclosure agreement or a confidentiality agreement, which basically says anything I disclose to, whether it's an employee, an independent contractor, or someone that you're in business with, they agree that they're going to keep this confidential. They're not going to share this information with any other third party. Pretty important to have when you're starting to negotiate, especially when you're still kind of trying to kick the tires and find out if you actually want to do business with this other company. So non-disclosure agreements, pretty important in my opinion. Non-compete agreements and non-solicitations agreements. Non-compete agreements, as time goes on and it's trending across the country, they're becoming less and less favored. They are enforceable in Ohio, but ultimately courts really do look at them pretty closely to say, is this something that really is appropriate for a non-compete agreement? So there's a reasonable test. There's a number of factors that need to be met. I generally tell clients, I'm like, I don't know if I would have a non-compete agreement. It's a lot of work. The employee's going to fight it. Are you really going to go to litigation for it? And if the answer is no, I'm not going to litigate a non-compete, I probably wouldn't include it, but I'd always include a non-solicitation. Little different, situation. A non-compete means after you leave employment with me for any reason, you're not going to, take another job in this area that competes with me. Where a non-solicitation is, if you leave, you can compete with me, just don't steal my customers. And that's usually the driving force behind the concern of a current employer, is to say, hey, if they ever leave, I just don't want them to steal all the customers that I let them work on. So that's usually what it ends up being, a real priority for my clients. And so having a nice non-solicitation, don't steal the employees. If you ever go leave, don't steal the customers. Don't take our confidential information. So I'm generally a big proponent of a non-solicitation. Non-competes, again, they are enforceable, but you really, if you're not going to enforce it and do litigation, I question, should you even put it in there? Why have that issue if you're not going to ultimately follow through with litigation? Okay, next slide. And then patents. So this is going to be some sort of invention. And that patents are governed by federal law that's filed with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Filing fees are not very high, but ultimately it's the legal fees that get you. You could, legal fees could be anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 for a patent. But if it's it's going to be a make it or break it for your company, you're also going into a space where there's a lot of other large companies that you're going to be competing with. Then I really do think hiring an attorney to getting this right, if it's really going to be the reason for your company, is important. Because if you're going to be competing against multinational companies, they have inventors on staff, they have attorneys on staff that are patent attorneys that are going to be looking at your patent and figuring out a way to get around it. So ultimately, I think it's really important. I'm not a patent attorney, so this is not a plug for me. But I really think if you think that this is going to be a game changer for you, this patent of yours, then I really do think you need to get your legal consultation. There are some relatively free or low fee legal clinics around. I believe Case Western Reserve has a legal clinic. I believe Akron University has a legal clinic at their law schools. So there are opportunities to try to get some assistance with patents. But I really do think you need to really consider retaining a patent attorney to help you with that. All right, next slide. And then copyrights and trademarks. They don't necessarily go hand in hand, but I have a lot of clients that get confused with them. So a copyright is a work of art. So think of a picture, think of music, think of lyrics, think of a book, think of a photograph that gets taken. Those are copyrighted images. And those are protected by federal law. You file your and get a copyright through the U.S. Library of Congress. That's one of the few areas that I think is relatively user friendly to be able to try on your own to get a copyright. And so I do recommend if you do have intellectual property that is going to be beneficial to you, especially if you want reoccurring income streams from that, then truly consider looking into a copyright. And then next slide, this is our trademarks. So the difference with a trademark and a copyright, a trademark is a source identifier. So when you see a logo, you're like, I know who made that. And then that ultimately triggers an image in your head of quality, of cost, who's wearing it, things like that. So you think of a trademark, you think of, the word Starbucks, the Starbucks Little Mermaid, and then, the double D for Dunkin' Donuts, the M for the arches for McDonald's, the UA for Under Armour, the swoosh for Nike, the little alligator for Izod. Those are all your trademarks. So as soon as you see that, you know exactly where that source of that product came from. And so that's, the purpose of a trademark. It identifies your product to the exclusion of all other products. There's two options to get a trademark. One is with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office for if you have federal interstate commerce, meaning you do business in more than one state. A little bit pricey. 200. I think it's around $325 per class of goods to get a trademark, and then your legal fees probably around $500 to do that trademark application. If you're just doing business in the state of Ohio, the state of Ohio Secretary of State can grant you a trademark. The trademark is only good in the state of Ohio. Very simple process. There's a form you fill out. I think it's $125 filing fee. Legal fee is going to be, under that 500 because it's a little bit more truncated process. That trademark is only good in the state of Ohio. And if there is a federal trademark that is the same or confusingly similar to your mark you're using in Ohio, even if you have a trademark in Ohio, if that other federal trademark predates you and is the senior user, you will not be able to, you'll be infringing on the senior user's trademark. And the I think the Ohio Secretary of State says, we do not check the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office website when we do our search. So it's only, they're only doing their search in Ohio. And I do think when you do name your business, when you do name a product, first thing is you check in the state of Ohio to see if the name's available. And then the next thing you do is you check with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office for name availability. Because you don't want to, register a name and then ultimately, purchase collateral to go with it and then get a cease and desist once you're starting to get known 2 or 3 or 5 years later. Now you have to rebrand, which could be expensive, and you lost that history of your mark. So, okay, next slide. So this is licensing. Like I mentioned earlier, I struggle getting through the presentation in time to talk about licensing. But if you ever have any intellectual property, it could be something written, could be your mark. Ultimately, you could license that. to a third party to sell, but you just want to make sure you have a license agreement with them that specifies, how they can use the mark, what products they can use the mark on. Do they have, any type of quality control issues, pricing issues, things like that. So if you're ever going to allow someone else to use your intellectual property, could even be a patent. You do want to make sure you have a license agreement and understand the terms of that grant of that license for some third party to use your intellectual property. All right, like I said, this is I believe that's the last slide. This is a mile wide and an inch deep, kind of drinking water through a fire hose. So I'll leave the next few minutes. I believe we are allotted an hour. So I'll leave the next few minutes if there's any questions that I could try to answer. Now, if they're very, very specific questions that are very unique to your business and not necessarily to everyone who may be listening, then maybe we'll talk offline. But ultimately, if there's some questions, I'm happy to try to answer them. And if ultimately this, I believe these slides are made available, you have my contact information on this slide and also on the first slide. And my office is based in Elyria. Okay.
Let's see. Get this out of the way. Do you want to take the chat or the questions?
Whatever is easiest for you to address.
Well, let's start with the questions. There are a couple of questions. I'm going to close the chat and go with the questions. You have two questions. The first one is, should a single member LLC become a W-2 employee of their company?
And again, this is to some degree, it's a tax question. If you're a single member limited liability company and you are taxed as a sole proprietorship, then I believe the answer is no, you cannot be a W-2 employee if you're a single member limited liability company and you're taxed as a sole proprietorship. If you want to take a W-2 wage as a single member limited liability company, I believe you have to make the sub-S tax election, and then you can pay yourself a W-2 wage. And if this was a question asked by one of my clients, I'd be like, please review this with your accountant. Because then you're going to look at, at some point in time, maybe it does make sense to transition from being taxed as a sole proprietor to being taxed as an S corp. So, or making the sub-S tax election, I should say. So that's going to be an accounting question, I believe.
All right. Let's go to the chat. There are some things in the chat, and I'm going to go back up to the top and make sure we didn't miss anything. Sorry again for the trouble with the sound at the beginning. We struggle with Zoom, as everybody does, and eventually we are now here. So let's see. Okay, should you establish an EIN with the IRS immediately after registering as an LLC with the state?
If you've created your company and you're not, say you create your company on January 1st, but you know for sure you're not going to be conducting business for the first 6 months of the year. You're looking to retire and you're not haven't retired, or some issue is going to happen, or you're waiting for some event to occur. Or maybe you don't even know if for sure you actually are going to start this business and you're hoping you will be able to, but it's still unknown. I probably would not get an EIN number until I know I'm going to start operating my business. I'd probably hold off. But if you're like, I'm registering this company and bang, right away, I'm going to start operating, then I would recommend getting your EIN.
Let's see what that. This next chat item is, with an LLC, is it necessary to have a registered agent with a separate address from your personal one?
So the answer is no. So your registered agent in Ohio, that would be called your statutory agent. So that's really personal preference. Because your statutory agent, the name and address are a public record. And so that's really your personal preference. If you want to have if you're doing business out of your home, if you, don't want people to know your home address as the statutory agent, then you can get a PO box or a UPS mailbox or something to that effect. But ultimately, that's really just there's no right or wrong legal answer on that. That's going to be your personal business decision. But your records with the Secretary of State, they're historical records. They can never be removed. So if you do it, it's somewhere in the string of filings, you have your personal address in there. It's going to be there forever, but it's not going to be, if you change it, it's not going to be on the front and center shown to the public, but they'd be able to drill through it and find that if they went through your prior filings. So hopefully that answered your question.
The next one, is the building and housing department from the city, or is there a separate zoning department?
It depends on how large the city is. But if you call up, they'll let you know if you're in the right department. If you're not, they'll transfer you. As soon as you start asking, I have a question regarding, can I operate my business out of this address? They're going to get you to the right person within their department. They're going to be happy you called them in advance. I'm truly serious. Dealing with a city building and housing departments, they're generally very, very easy to deal with when you talk to them in advance and you're not an enforcement issue. Now, you might not get the answer you like, but they're going to be more than happy to try to work with you and talk with you about this.
Okay, the next one is, what if you have to pay association fees?
I mean, like you're a business condo, sure. I mean, that would just be, one of your expenses of your lease of operating your business at that location. That should be something that you find out when you're looking to buy the location or lease the location. What all expenses do you have? So that could happen. You're in a business condo.
All right. Would like to talk to you offline. Alicia Garcia is asking that question. Alicia, if you're still online, Chris's phone number and email address are displayed on the screen. Hopefully you can have an opportunity to copy those down and reach him offline rather. Okay. Do you need to establish an LLC for each business, or can one be for all? EIN as well.
So this is all your eggs in one basket question. So do you need to set up a separate limited liability company for, the easiest example is residential rental properties. You have 5 residential rental properties. Do you have to have a separate limited liability company for each residential rental property? No. You can have them all within one company. If one thing goes wrong, some liabilities occurred, then all 5 properties are potential up for collection. So that's why, some business owners like to segregate the assets into separate limited liability companies. It's now been about a year and a half. Ohio does allow a series limited liability company, which allows you to create one limited liability company, have one EIN, but then have multiple series within the company. And then each series can have its own property that it owns and liabilities that it incurs without impacting any other series within the company. So that is an option. Other states have had it. It's just brand new in Ohio. So, that's obviously a different seminar, but that is an option in Ohio. And you can convert an existing limited liability company into a series limited liability company, and then the assets are titled separately into each series.
Okay. If my lease is a 5-year with option to renew, but the rent is based off of fair market value, how is market value determined?
Well, that will be ultimately, you potentially you look at, you hire a real estate agent to do some comps for you, to look and see what other people are paying in similar marketing, similar environments, in classes of real estate. So that's the problem. There's going to be negotiations that occur now, even though you have the option to renew. The amount of rent that you're going to be paying is unknown. So that will, when you tell your landlord, I want to renew, then you're going to have this discussion. And if you don't like the number that the landlord comes back with, then you have the ability to hire your own real estate agent and come back with an alternative number of what's market rate for your area.
Okay, let's go to the next one. Can we create an entire series on opening a restaurant or bar? How to get a liquor license?
So yeah, when you first initially create your limited liability company, yeah, you can make it a series limited liability company. And so that's created from the outset. That's based on the language you put into your articles of organization and in the information in your operating agreement. I've never experienced a series LLC with a liquor license. So I don't have any I don't have any experience with that. And how the Ohio Division of Liquor Control would view a series limited liability company with a liquor license. So I would imagine it'd be very similar to a regular limited liability company. The whole thing is what owners are going to have to be listed and get background checks. So that would probably be talking to some of the attorneys within the Division of Liquor Control to ask those questions and get that final decision.
Hey,
And
Chris,
the,
We're at the 8 o'clock mark. There's just
okay,
three more chat questions here. We'll try and take them, and
sure.
then we're going to close it out as soon as we've taken these next three messages. And if there are additional questions from attendees, you have Chris's contact information on the screen, and so contact him directly. We're going to just take the next three and then say good evening to everybody.
Okay, that sounds good.
It's regarding how our landscaping, not sure what that means there. That's Alicia, that's what she's going to call you about.
Okay.
We have reached the end there I thought there were three more for some reason. We've reached the end of the chat. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to put my video back up. You can stop looking at my birds. They will come back. There we go. I want to thank Chris for a great presentation. Thank you very much, Chris, especially for jury rigging it from being on the road. That's always a challenge. This recording, this session was recorded. The slides and the presentation will be on the SCORE website, Cleveland website next week. Takes a couple of days for us to edit everything down and get everything done. And then it'll be available. There are other sessions that are coming forward, and they'll be advertised. You can sign up, by the way, for the SCORE newsletter on the SCORE website and be notified of these. But the other in the legal series are human resources, intellectual property, business contracts, and patents. And there are many other webinars. We run about 100 webinars a year for small business. So please do see if there's anything of interest to you. With that, I will wish everyone good evening, and thank you again, Chris, for a great job.
All right. Yep, always happy. Thank you.